Hello, my name is Ian Campbell, Director of the Disability Services Office for UW Human Resources, and today I will be presenting on the manager's role in the disability employment accommodation process. In today's presentation, I will be covering 4 key training objectives. First, understanding key terms and the legal and policy foundation for disability accommodation at the University of Washington. Second, you'll learn what to do and who to contact if you receive a disability disclosure or an accommodation request. Then we'll dive deep into the interactive process and learn from some case studies. Finally, I will direct you to some online resources for more information. What is a reasonable accommodation? A reasonable accommodation is a modification or an adjustment made to the work environment, task, or procedure that enables an employee with a temporary or ongoing disability to perform the essential functions of their job. Changing the way things are usually done in the workplace allows employees with a reasonable accommodation the ability to perform the essential functions of the job and have an equal opportunity to be successful in the workplace. It's really impossible to provide a list of all possible reasonable accommodations due to the various ways in which people experience disability and the huge variation in job functions in our ever-evolving workplace. But we did want to provide you with a few examples. Examples of reasonable accommodations can be modifications to job duties, modifications in work schedules, providing supplemental written instructions, provision of assistive equipment or software, a leave of absence, or coordination of American Sign Language interpretation for deaf employees. These accommodations can be temporary or ongoing, depending on the disability. At the University of Washington, we greatly value equity and access for all employees, including employees with disabilities. Therefore, provision of disability accommodations is essential in creating a healthy workplace for all. Accommodations are designed to remove barriers to accessibility, ensuring that individuals with disabilities have equal opportunities to succeed. Accommodations are part of creating a diverse, inclusive, and welcoming environment for all employees. I'd like to provide you with a brief policy foundation for disability accommodation. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, is a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in many aspects of public life, including employment. The ADA requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations unless doing so would cause undue hardship. At the University of Washington, Administrative Policy Statement 46.5 on reasonable accommodation of employees with disabilities is our highest level policy within the institution. I'd also like to refer you to the UW Human Resources Disability Accommodation Policy, which goes into greater granularity in the process, including how to request an accommodation. As a manager, what do you need to know about your role in the disability accommodation process? Employees can request an accommodation directly through UWHR, but often employees go to their managers first as their primary point of contact. So do not be surprised if your employees disclose disability or request an accommodation. Don't worry, you are not expected to be an expert in handling accommodations. UWHR is here to support you. What you are expected to do is follow university policies and process, guide your employees to the appropriate resources, contact UWHR and departmental HR if applicable for questions and support, and finally, keep an open mind throughout the employment accommodation process. As referenced on the previous slide, managers are not expected to be experts in the disability accommodation process. UWHR has accommodation consultants waiting to support you as the manager as well as your employees. Your primary contact within UWHR depends on the position type and the department. All campus staff, ASEs, and student employees, contact your department's assigned human resources consultant in UWHR. Medical center staff, contact your leave and accommodation specialists within MedCenter's human resources. For academic personnel, contact the Disability Services Office. Job applicants and other members of the public may also contact the Disability Services Office. Campus facility staff, contact your local employee relations manager for support. As a manager, how should you respond to an employee's request for accommodation or disclosure of disability? Number one, never deny a request without consulting with UWHR, as per Administrative Policy Statement 46.5. Say yes to simple workplace adjustments that don't require medical documentation, unusual expense, or changing job functions, and which are readily available and approvable. Examples of workplace adjustments are anti-glare screen protectors, ergonomic computer mice or keyboards, or non-latex gloves that you would provide to any other employee. If you provide a workplace adjustment, send an email to the employee documenting what was asked for, what was provided, and ensure that the employee knows that they should notify you if the adjustment doesn't solve their issue or if their medical needs change. Unless a simple adjustment is available and appropriate, follow university process and involve UW Human Resources. There are 4 primary steps in the accommodation process. The first is recognizing and responding to the request for accommodation. The second is engaging in the interactive process. The accommodations process is both interactive and iterative. And accommodation consultants within UWHR facilitate a discussion between the employee and the department in order to identify reasonable accommodations. The third step in the process is deciding what accommodation should be implemented and documenting the implementation of that accommodation. The fourth step is implementing the accommodation and monitoring the accommodation to make sure that it's effective for the employee. Diving deeper into step 1 of the accommodation process, recognizing the request. A disclosure of disability or a request for accommodation should never be ignored under any circumstances. Recognizing the request may be the only step that you may have to do without the support of UWHR. Requests can come in many different formats, and we wanted to provide you with just a simple example. An employee may approach you and say, "Because of my medical condition, I'm struggling to perform a specific job function." The employee may tell you exactly what they need, but they also may not know what accommodation they need. An employee might complain of pain or difficulty performing the job duty without making a specific request for accommodation. An employee may disclose a medical condition in response to formal performance counseling. If an employee tries to provide you with medical documentation, it's really important that you refer the employee to UWHR without accepting the medical documentation. Medical documentation should never be contained in departmental files. Responding to the request. How you respond matters. If an employee discloses a medical condition but doesn't make a request for a specific accommodation, we recommend that you simply reply, "How can I help you?" and allow the employee to further elaborate on what they think they may need. Do not discuss the medical condition. Inform the employee that there is no need to share any further medical information. Instead, focus the conversation on impacts to job duties. How does the employee feel that they're impacted within their job? Finally, refer the employee by email to the Disability Services Office Disability Accommodation webpage for further information on how to engage in the formal interactive process. Step 2. The interactive process. As mentioned earlier, the accommodations process is both interactive and iterative. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the swim lanes within the interactive process. The role of the manager is to provide UWHR with information about the position's duties and the unit's operations. What are the department's business needs? The role of the employee is to describe how their disability is impacting their ability to do their job, and the employee may be asked to provide medical information from their healthcare provider. UWHR works with you as the manager and your unit and the requesting employee to identify reasonable accommodations that will enable the employee to perform all the essential functions of the job. Step 3. Deciding and documenting. UWHR provides centralized support for analyzing requests for accommodation and documenting implementation of accommodations. UWHR accommodation consultants will assist with analyzing information gathered during the interactive process. Once reasonable accommodations are identified, the accommodation consultants will also assist departments in documenting implementation of reasonable accommodations. As the manager, it's very important that if you ever receive medical information by mistake, forward it immediately to UWHR. Medical documentation should never be kept in departmental files. Step 4. Implementing and monitoring. Ongoing communication is key between employees, departments, and UWHR. Employees with accommodations are held to the same qualitative and quantitative standards as other employees. Accommodations may need to be revisited if an employee's medical condition changes, business needs change, or the accommodation is no longer effective. Contact the appropriate accommodation consultant with any questions or concerns. See Slide 8 to determine who the appropriate accommodation consultant is for your department. Now that we've discussed the 4 steps of the accommodations process, I'd like to discuss the importance of confidentiality. Medical and accommodation information is only shared with those who have an administrative need to know. Some employees may choose to self-disclose disability or the existence of a disability accommodation, and that's their choice. Managers must always maintain confidentiality. If a coworker of an employee who is receiving an accommodation approaches you and asks why the employee is receiving special treatment, it's recommended that you simply respond by saying you're following university policy. Never disclose that someone on your team has a disability or that they're receiving a disability accommodation. I'd like to give an example of a time when someone within a department may have an administrative need to know. For example, let's say that an employee is receiving an assistive technology accommodation. Departmental IT may have an administrative need to know that the accommodation is in place so that they can ensure compatibility with existing IT platforms. But departmental IT would not have a need to know about the nature of the disability. Now we're moving on to a few case studies. The case studies are formatted in multiple choice format. Case study number 1. A program coordinator complains of wrist pain and requests a specific mouse used successfully at home. The manager assesses whether they would offer a different mouse to any other team member. Which of the following is a non-compliant course of action? Option 1. If willing to provide an alternative mouse to others, approve the purchase and document via email. Option 2. If unable to provide the mouse, direct the employee by email to the DSO website for accommodation procedures and copy the relevant accommodation consultant. Option 3. Ask the employee if their wrist pain stems from a diagnosed medical condition. The non-compliant course of action would be to ask the employee if their wrist pain stems from a diagnosed medical condition. Asking an employee for details about their potential medical condition is never okay. Case study number 2. A program operations specialist receives negative performance feedback from their manager due to missed deadlines. During a performance discussion with their manager, they reveal they're adjusting medication for ADHD, and they request indefinite deadline extensions. Which of the following courses of action would be non-compliant? Option 1. Assess if deadline extensions would be granted to other team members. If yes, approve and document via email. Option 2. Don't decline the request outright. Inform the employee you'll consult with a disability accommodation consultant and refer the employee to the disability accommodation resources on the DSO website. Option 3. Discuss the effects of the employee's ADHD medication, incorporating personal knowledge from friends and family taking the same medication. The non-compliant course of action would be to discuss the effects of the employee's ADHD medication, incorporating personal knowledge from friends and family taking the same medication. If an employee shares medical information, do not ask for further medical information and refocus the conversation towards the accommodation process. Case study number 3. A faculty member reports to their department chair that they are experiencing back pain while sitting at their desk after a recent medical procedure. The faculty member requests a sit-stand desk, recommended by their doctor, that will exceed the department's annual equipment budget allocation. Which of the following is a non-compliant course of action? Option A. If unable to provide the sit-stand desk, direct the employee by email to the DSO website for accommodation procedures and copy the relevant accommodation consultant. Option B. Deny the request and inform the faculty member that funding is exhausted for the annual budget allocation. Option C. Consider using alternative funds to provide the sit-stand desk. The non-compliant course of action would be to deny the request and inform the faculty member that funding is exhausted for the annual budget allocation. A department may never deny an accommodation request without working with the Disability Services Office for faculty and academic personnel, or their HR accommodation consultant for staff and student employees, and funding limitations should never be a final consideration. And to conclude today's presentation, I would like to tell you about some resources available on campus to support the employment accommodation process. The first is the Disability Services Office in UW Human Resources. The DSO provides leadership in achieving employment and educational access for individuals with disabilities. The DSO provides a number of different services, including services to faculty and staff with disabilities, mainly in the form of employment accommodation advice and resources for departments, subject matter expertise on assistive equipment, coordination of interpreters and real-time captioning for deaf and hard of hearing community members, general access accommodations for members of the public attending UW events, and support to mitigate barriers to access throughout the university. Please feel free to contact the Disability Services at any time for consultation. And I would like to leave you today with some web resources should you choose to do further research or if you would like further consultation around employment accommodation. The first is the UW Human Resources Disability Accommodation Policy with a link included. The second is the Disability Services Office Disability Accommodation for Employees webpage. Administrative Policy Statement 46.5, the Policy on Reasonable Accommodation of Employees with Disabilities. And finally, a link to the HR contacts page. If you did need to make contact with a disability accommodation consultant, this is a comprehensive list of all contacts within HR. Thank you very much for your time in viewing this presentation today.